Good evening, everybody. I want to thank you all for coming. My name's David Oakes. I'm the CAO for the City of St. Catharines. Tonight we're going to do as much question and answering as we can. I know there's a lot of questions out there. We have representatives from a variety of our partner agencies and the city departments. Any questions that we aren't going to be able to answer or we can't answer due to investigations that are still underway, we're going to continue to update the city website as we go through over time. So anytime, soon as we can answer questions, we will do so. So without further ado, I'm going to kick things off and pass it over to Mayor Matt Cisco to do some opening remarks.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate that. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for attending this evening's update meeting on the 20 Keefer Road fire and explosions that occurred on January 12th. I just want to take a brief moment to thank Councillor Mark Stevens for coming this evening. Regional Councillor Sal Sorrento is also here. And I want to take a specific moment to thank the two ward councillors, Deputy Mayor Phillips and Councillor Don Dodge. I know they were at the meeting back in January that was very quickly called after the explosion took place. Deputy Mayor Phillips was representing my office here as I had several meetings, and unfortunately we didn't have the information about the meeting until the last minute. So I appreciate Deputy Mayor Phillips. I appreciate Councillor Dodge. They have both been very effective voices for everybody in this room, everybody in the surrounding community over the last several weeks. And you'll hear a little bit this evening about the actions that they have taken at City Council and the things that they've tried to move through. Before we get too far, I want to again offer condolences to the family and friends of Ryan Conkin. I had a chance to meet Natalia at the memorial that she held for him in Port Dalhousie, and my heart is with her and for all of those who were impacted by this tragedy. The safety of the neighborhood and the environmental protection at this point is our top priority. The city is working on a day-to-day basis with partner agencies through this very complex investigation, and the remediation of the property in the surrounding area continues. Tonight we have the city, a number of officials from the city, our Chief Administrative Officer, David Oakes, who you've already met, as well as our Fire Chief, folks from Engineering, Facilities, and Environmental Services. I'll ask if the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation, and Parks folks could give a wave. There we go. And we also have Niagara Region Public Health and Public Health Ontario, if they want to give us a wave as well. Wonderful. So for the agenda this evening, the presenters will provide updates, and then we'll have questions at the end. So we want to get through all of the presentations. I think many of the questions hopefully will be answered during those presentations. We will do our best to answer all of the questions that come forward. As Mr. Oakes has stated, there are some questions that we may not have the information to answer at this time, or we may not be able to answer for a variety of reasons. We do have a hard stop of 8:30 this evening, but that gives us an hour and a half, and I do hope that we'll be able to get through all of the questions and answers that are here in the room, as well as the questions that have been sent through to us through email. So at this point, I will now turn it over to St. Catharines Fire Chief Dave Upper.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's a couple of objectives we want to run through tonight. I know we've had a lot of questions with regards to the response component, so I'll speak to that for a little bit, and then the investigations and some of the environmental work that went on, and then the recovery piece. As well as we're going to bring up the public health folks and the Ministry of Environment to say a few words, and then we'll walk into that question period like Mr. Mayor Matt Cisco said. We'll try to be brief in our presentation so we can spend more time doing questions. So just on that note with PowerPoint, obviously we know where the incident was. Most people live in that neighborhood. The incident details, just very quickly, we know Thursday, January 12th, we had the event at 6:30 in the morning. We received a phone call for report of a structure fire. Our response comes from Pump 2 on Grantham Avenue, or Pump 6 rather on Grantham Avenue, Pump 2 on Linwell Road, Pump 1 from headquarters, the ladder truck from Meriton, and then there were a rescue unit and the command post from headquarters as well. The one thing we didn't have on the slide is the weather that day was, it was a pretty nice day actually to start. We had a south wind about 10 km, which was very ideal for the incident and what we were dealing with. It was overcast in the morning, and I don't know if everybody remembers, but it got pretty ugly in the afternoon with some pretty crummy weather. We had lots of rain. The response, and I know there's been concerns with regards to getting over the canal. When we look at the response, and I was looking at the crew response times, we had a very good response. The bridge was down, of course, because of the season that we had, and so we had everybody on scene in a very timely fashion. This is just an overhead shot for orientation for everyone. You can see the Sonics building there and the Keefer Road. You'll possibly hear the Ministry of Environment or some of the environment people talk about, you know, the west ditch or the ditch to the south. And so you can just kind of get an orientation. Obviously up is heading north. So the response piece. The incident commander, upon arriving at scene, right away recognized the severity of the situation. We went into a defensive strategy. Once we got the initial crew set up and he's seen what we were dealing with regards to the hazmat component, right away we're looking at that life hazard profile. So we look at starting to look at the map of the neighborhood and to see who's going to stay and who's going to shelter in place and who's going to be evacuated. As the fire chief and the deputies, we get phone calls right away when we have large events like this. So as soon as I received the phone call, so a funny thing was I was on the ice in Jordan with my son's hockey team, and I get a call while I'm out in the middle of the ice. So I said, okay, I stepped off. So as soon as I got into the car, I called the incident commander to help support the evacuation component. I spoke to him for a few minutes. I told him to just hold the police, have them pause while we sort a few things out. My next phone call was to the Community and Recreational and Cultural Services. One of our staff members, Lori Mambella, who's an incredible lady, and she's an early riser. So thankfully, she was already at work and good to go. I explained to her what we had, and she said, yep, send everybody our way. So the wheels in motion right away for the evac started. I went back to the incident commander, told him that Lori Mambella was setting up at the Kiwanis Aquatic Center and that we could receive everybody there. At the command post, he notified the Niagara Regional Police to go to these streets. These were the streets that we were looking to evacuate and alert everybody to head to the aquatic center. Everything happened very quickly. I was quite happy with how fast and the speed of getting the resources there, because sometimes it takes a little bit longer than you'd like. So within the first hour, which usually it takes longer, but we had already notified the Ministry of Environment. We had first response emergency come through our hazmat contractor to start, because we knew with the volumes of water and what we were flowing through the hazmat scene, we wanted to contain as much as the water as we possibly could. So we had everybody moving quite quickly. I was working, my deputy, Andrea DeYoung, is here, and Trevor Parker from our operations side was on site, and very quickly we were able to pull everyone together. And then once we've got those resources moving, we activated the EOC, which is our Emergency Operations Center, which pulls everybody together. Another piece to this one, we started contacting the Ministry of Environment and our first response folks for the environmental piece was we made a phone call to our municipal works. We spoke to Director Daryl Smith, and he we got on the phone with John Kukalis. Right away, they contacted the region because we wanted to know where this water was going to land once it got flowing. So we were working with the region immediately within the first half hour, just looking at the different waterways of which the water was going to be traveling and where it was going to go. And that's where we were able to determine it was going to come through 3 separate waterways, but it was all going to go straight into Lake Ontario. So during the day, and just to give you kind of an idea of the scope of what went on, so you have the suppression operations, which we continue to work defensively. We had Niagara EMS on site in case there was any more problems medically with anybody or any of our staff. The regional police, of course, were doing traffic control and site security. And from Municipal Works, our mechanical division, to keep the trucks up and running to make sure everything, because we're flowing an awful lot of water and we don't want to have any hiccups. On the environmental side, we have the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, and they brought in their emergency response team for the air quality testing. So we had called for them right away, and they were great. They assembled and they were on site in the morning to start testing for the air quality. First response arrived mid-morning. They came from Burlington, and that's actually a pretty good time frame for a response team for them to assemble, turn out, and get on scene. And they arrived with their boat. A couple of people asked, what's the boat for? And we said, well, we were working with our friends in Municipal Works, so we know the water is making its way to the lake, so we need you to put a boom up in these designated areas. From the community support point of view, Director Phil Christie was working with Lori Mambella. I don't know how many of you were at the Aquatic Center, but I know that they received everybody. There was a bit of a registration process, and then they were providing some good care. There was coffee and some food and a few things, and then later on we were able to meet with them once things settled at the event. Corporately, our corporate communications folks, we started working with them to try to get word out through our social media channels. A lot of requests from the media, so they were handling those things for us and trying to keep the website and the city updated. Later on in the event, we wanted to be able to get to the residents a flyer with the Ministry of Environment's phone number in case you had concerns. The environmental piece, for sure, not me, but as a corporation, we're not the technical experts, so that's where we really lean heavily on the Ministry of Environment to help us out. So that takes care of the on-site stuff. That's day one, so to speak. As we roll into day two, we have kind of the suppression operations wrap up, and this is where the investigation and environmental piece comes in. Probably more is what you want to hear about. So the environmental piece continued from the first day. First response stayed on scene. Again, prioritizing that containment of water, making sure we're getting some surface water samples being done, we're getting soil samples being done, and then the air quality is being tested. And we were getting good results at all the different places, and there's a lot of hydro vac trucks. I know people were commenting about the big tanks in the neighborhood, and we're using, obviously, those as our storage containers. You can see from the slide here, the Ministry of Environment, and I've got 60 written in there because over the time frame, there was 60 different staff members working the site. So it was a very good response from the ministry. They were tremendously helpful. Their emergency response team does the air quality, surface water specialist teams looking after, all the water sampling that's being done, and then their terrestrial field service team is not only looking at where the douse water is landing, but where it's traveling through to see what it's picking up on its travels and then where it's ending up. So a lot of work happening with the ministry. We contracted an environmental consultant as well to help us. EFI Global was a company that we contracted through our insurance company, and they sent their consultant on site. So there's a lot of environmental work happening because we, of course, wanted to keep you folks safe, want to try to contain everything to the site, make sure that we didn't have any more environmental damage. The consultant there, Andre Brarini, he was the environmental consultant from First Response. So you can see there's a lot of players on the environmental side on this. The investigation piece with the Office of the Fire Marshal, we continued to investigate, and the Office of the Fire Marshal had 11 staff members coming through. We had the drone team, we had forensic engineers coming in to do a lot of the investigation piece because of the complexity. The OPP brought in their mobile testing lab because, of course, with the fire and explosion, a lot of the labeling was gone. So we had chemicals we did not know we were dealing with. And so they were setting up their mobile lab and taking samples so that we could determine the different chemicals that we had on the go. The Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks had their investigation enforcement branch come in. So that's another investigative piece for us that came forward and started working as well. And then Technical Standards and Safety Authority, they're the folks that do all the gas stuff, propane, natural gas. They were on scene as well. The one thing I can say with regards to the investigation is that TSSA has determined that natural gas was not a factor in the event. So we were able to reconstruct that piece and make that determination that natural gas was ruled out. The Niagara Regional Police, of course, with regards, and the Ministry of Labor, because of the fatality, they become part of the investigation as well. Well, the one thing I wanted to say, a lot of people were asking, why is it taking so long? And it was because of the complexity of not only did we have chemicals that we didn't know what we were dealing with, but we also had a building where we had lost the structural integrity of the building. So we're kind of in a bit of an unusual situation where we need to take care of maybe some of the chemicals that are outside to get the piece of the building that's going to collapse. And then we need to bring in the engineers to whether we demolition that piece of the building or whether we shore it up. So we're basically working 10 feet at a time. So we take 10 feet and we stabilize some of the chemicals that we're dealing with, and then we move them to make some real estate, and then we bring in the engineers, and of course everyone's in hazmat suits, and they do an assessment, they come back, we need to get the carpenters to shore up the wall, or we bring in the heavy equipment to take it down. So we virtually did this every day, 10 feet at a time. So that's why that 4-week time frame took so long. We had to work, basically the explosion was in the middle of a big rectangle, and we had to work both ends to get towards the middle. So that's where the 4 weeks, we were really hoping, when we first got into it, maybe it'd be 7 to 10 days, and then it's like 2 weeks, and then, wow, this is taking a lot longer. And then don't forget, we've had some great weather, right? We had snow, and then we get the rain and everything else. So it's been a bit of a challenge. So the recovery component, where are we now? So the investigation concluded on Friday, February the 10th, and we were able to return the site to the owner. The Ministry of Labor had also seized the site and the Office of the Fire Marshal. Both those agencies, we met at headquarters with the owner, and we returned the site back to the owner. So now that the owner has the site back, the on-site investigation piece is now concluded. However, everyone's back into their offices sifting through all the data, all the information that was collected over those 4 weeks. And so it's going to take months before they get this whole thing wrapped up. And then keep in mind as well, like I spoke to the Office of the Fire Marshal the other day, and I asked how things are going, and that particular lead investigator had another previous fire several months ago that's finally landed in court. So they said, unfortunately, the investigator is dealing right now, he's in court working another case, and then as soon as the court is wrapped up, he'll get back to what we've got going on. So there's a lot of moving parts there. So the property owner now is got care of the site. They're working with the Ministry of Environment, Conservation, and Parks. As you can see from the slide, the City of St. Catharines is still involved with our environmental sciences team, and then our contractor, EFI Global, are continuing to work with the owner to take care of all the chemicals on site and making sure that we keep that site safe for everybody. So next steps, where we go. So that's kind of where we're at, the recovery piece. The investigation's ongoing. We're going to continue to work with EFI Global and our environmental folks to monitor not only just that site, but the neighborhood around it. We'll provide support to the investigating agencies as they need. And then we want to try to keep you folks updated as best we can and assure you that we're keeping everything safe for not just the residential community, but the business community around it. The one thing I'd like to do is just take this opportunity to thank those agencies that are with us. I know working with the Ministry of Environment, with Andrea and Taylor Buck, a lot of long days, long nights. So thanks for all the work. I know the Office of the Fire Marshal isn't here, but essentially what was happening is we were working on site till dark, and then all the emails were happening at 10 o'clock at night. So at 10 o'clock at night, we're getting emails from the Ministry of Environment, the Office of the Fire Marshal, kind of wrapping up the day's events. So they would go home for dinner, and then as they're winding the night down, get back to us. So this thing was running pretty much till bedtime, till you got up in the morning. So thanks for all your hard work. Thanks to the Office of the Fire Marshal. I know the Ministry of Labor is not here. They did a ton of work. Niagara Regional Police. So all those other agencies, I know I've missed a few along the way, TSSA, but thank you very much for helping us get through this thing. At this time now, I'd like to bring up the Ministry of Environment to just say a few words.
And thanks, Dave, for that excellent recap, and thanks to all our agency partners as well. You've been a tremendous help throughout this incident for the ministry. As Dave mentioned, my name is Taylor Buck. I am the district supervisor at the Ministry of Environment, Conservation, and Parks Niagara office. And I also have with me here tonight Andrea Lloyd. She's an environmental officer here in Niagara, and she's been the lead for this incident. Both Andrea and I have been involved since January 12th when the fire occurred. So for those of you in the audience that may not be familiar with our ministry, our role at an event like this is to assess for potential impacts to human health and the environment, and to ensure that responsible parties are taking appropriate actions to clean up and restore the natural environment. We were not in attendance for the first meeting that occurred with respect to the Sonics fire. So I'm here tonight to provide the community an update on some of the work that the ministry has done and some of the work that we'll be doing in the future. I know many of you here tonight have questions and concerns around air, water, and soil quality, along with the site itself. So I'll start with a brief overview of some of the sampling and monitoring initiatives that we've completed to date. So in terms of air monitoring, we completed 2 different exercises, one during the fire at 2 nearby schools, along with downwind locations, and then again a week later at appropriate downwind locations. I'm happy to say that our air monitoring efforts did not identify air quality concerns for either of these events. We've passed along that information to both our partners at the city, along with public health. The ministry has also completed a number of water sampling events since the fire occurred. So as Dave mentioned, one of the big concerns was douse water. There was a lot applied for that fire, so we wanted to ensure that any of those receiving water bodies were being monitored so we could determine the extent of those impacts. So our sampling has been focused in the ditches adjacent to the site, along with those tributaries that are receiving water from those ditches. Our preliminary results are showing that douse water impacts in those ditches adjacent to the creek probably need some cleanup activities at some point. And we are also currently in the process of conducting soil and sediment sampling, as Dave had also mentioned. So we have our terrestrial field services team. They've been on site a number of times, and we're really looking at downwind locations in areas that may have been impacted by that douse water. This sampling event is ongoing and likely will be completed the week of March 20th. All of the available sample results are currently under review by ministry experts, and we've also shared those with both the city and with public health. With respect to the status of the site, cleanup is underway and measures are in place to prevent further off-site migration. And Andrea and some of the other members of our Niagara team continue to inspect the site on a routine basis to monitor the cleanup activities and to assess the integrity of the site's containment measures. The ministry has also suspended the facility's environmental compliance approval conditions with respect to receiving and processing waste. And an order has also been issued to the owners of Sonics to prepare and submit a plan to assess the extent of impacts, and that will be reviewed by the ministry. Once the extent of the fire impacts are determined, and that's looking at both our results and any results provided by the city and through the Sonics work plan, the ministry will ensure that steps are taken to restore impacted areas to their pre-fire condition. In moving forward, our office will continue to closely monitor the progress of both the order and ongoing cleanup activities. And in addition, a ministry investigation is also in its preliminary stages. I have here with me Warren Corll and Brad Farnan, who can speak a little bit more about that.
Good day. Excuse me, you're going to have to come to the podium to speak if you don't mind. So it's just for the benefit of the people at home.
I was going to use my playground voice, but
I'm not allowed to use my
I appreciate it. Okay.
So my name is Warren Corll. I'm one of the investigators that is assigned to this matter. My colleague Brad Farnan is with me also. There's 4 investigators that are assigned to this investigation. Chief Uffer has done a very good job of describing all of the things that all of the different investigations are undertaken at this time. We are interested in the impact that it has caused you folks or anybody else into the community. I can tell you that we have sent out a fan-out letter through the mail to over 700 homes If you didn't get one of those letters and wish to report impact to yourselves, I have another stack over there, and I'm happy to give them out to you. We've received 100 responses in relation to impact. We are very interested in what you have to say and how this has impacted everybody in the community. And I can tell you, as the chief has stated here, with so many investigations being undertaken, it's not one of it's something that we typically don't get immediate responses back. We look for patience, but I can tell you that your interests are being looked after, we hope, by you folks. If anybody wants a business card of mine and wants to talk to me, come and see me after the meeting, and I'll gladly answer questions that I can. So, thank you.
One of the things I'd like to add before we move on is, now that we've moved into the investigation portion, we still meet. Last week we met with the different agencies that are doing the investigation piece just to collaborate, to see who needs what information, does everybody have what they need, and so that dialogue is still going on. So even though the fire is over and there's some work going off site, that investigation piece is still moving forward. At this time, we'd like to call up Dr. Kazmani from Public Health to say a few words there. We're very thrilled to have Public Health come in today and speak to us. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you, everybody. So my name is Azim Kazmani. I'm one of the Associate Medical Officers of Health here for Niagara Region Public Health, and I'm here with Colin Horn, who is one of our managers in the Environmental Health Division. So I'll turn it over to Colin to start, and then I'll follow him.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to be here with us this evening. Our role at Niagara Region Public Health is to liaise with all the agencies that are involved and to accurately assess the risk to the public's health. The Ministry of Environment and Conservation and Parks, they're really the experts on taking samples and testing for potential contaminants in the water, the air, and the soil. We've been in regular communication with the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks since the event, since day one. And as sample results are provided to us, we take that information and we look at that information independently, and we forward those same sample results to Public Health Ontario to give us a little bit of assistance with interpretation and analysis. Public Health Ontario is a provincial agency that supports local public health units in providing scientific evidence and expert analysis to really help us understand what these sample results mean. Public Health Ontario is also valuable in providing guidance to us and helping us assess if there are any potential pathways for exposure or if there's any public health risk. If any assessment determines that there is a public health risk, appropriate actions are taken to communicate that to the public, communicate that to our communities, and to minimize the risk. Our main priority at Niagara Region Public Health is to protect the health of everybody, to have the health of our communities and our well-being of our residents in top of mind. And we will continue to work with all the agencies involved to ensure that all the information is analyzed properly and everything is risk assessed appropriately, just as we've done since day one of the investigation. So just wanted to communicate that to you, and I'll pass the conversation to Dr. Kazmani.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. So again, as Colin noted, our main goal is to see what's the risk to human health, what's the risk to the health of the public. I think you've seen over the past few years the lengths to which we're willing to go to ensure the health of the public is protected. So in the case of an environmental emergency, the questions we're asking is, what is the pollutant, and what are the potential health impacts of that? How much of that pollutant do we need to be exposed to cause those health impacts? And how are people exposed to that pollutant? Is it through the skin? How does it get into the body? Is it through the skin? Is it through eating it or drinking it? Is it through breathing it in? Or is it through something like a radiation? And then how much of that pollutant are we exposed to? And then we use that information to characterize the risk to the public. And so, as Colin noted, the Ministry of Environment is responsible for completing the testing. They have the ability to actually do that testing, and then they send those results to us. So we get those results, and we do an independent analysis. We work with our expert partners at Public Health Ontario, who provide support to us. They are the subspecialists in these areas, for example, of environmental health and across the regions of public health. And then we work with them to answer those questions that I asked, to characterize the risk, and then determine what the next steps need to be. So really here, you can think of the two main ways are breathing it in or consuming it through eating or drinking, and at the time of the fire and then after the fire. So we're looking at those different phases to see what's the risk, what's the acute risk right now, what's the long-term risk of long-term exposure, and then we ask all of those questions each time. How much are we being exposed to? Are we being exposed to any? How are we being exposed to? How much do we need to absorb for there to be a risk? So at the time of the fire, there's a risk of breathing in chemicals. And I think as the Chief and as the Ministry of Environment said earlier, the initial concentration of chemicals on the air that day were below the levels that would cause a significant health risk. And as soon as that those levels were below that level, but that was the level at which when you stop being exposed, the risk goes away, it's reversed. And then the follow-up tests have been similarly reassuring, showing us back down to baseline levels and that there's not an ongoing risk. So if the question is there a risk to me breathing the air outside? I would say, no, there isn't. If there was, we would be recommending everybody wear that N95 mask when you're outside. We're also used to wearing our masks now, but we didn't feel the need because there isn't that ongoing risk at this time. The other potential source is the water, drinking the water. Is there a risk to drinking the water? Can I get sick from that? The municipal drinking water is not affected by the fire, and there's no risk for drinking municipal water here in St. Catharines. And so I just want to reassure everyone in that way. I'd like to thank, similarly to the Chief, our partners in working together closely in this, especially like our partners from Public Health Ontario who've come out for this event just to show their support and show you and help answer any questions as well as the City of St. Catharines, the Ministry of Environment, our own Niagara EMS, who are part of the region, Niagara Health, and the police, the fire, everyone else involved in this. It is a complex event, and it shows to me the importance of our different agencies working together, but also having the capacity to respond to things like this. We look at other events elsewhere, and it's often deregulation or funding cuts, and so I think for us, being able to come to these events to respond is really important and shows the importance of our role. So I'll turn it back over, and I'm happy to take any questions after at the end when we're done. So that's great.
Thank you so much, doctors. We're going to move into the question phase of this. As we were saying earlier, unfortunately, with regards to the investigation piece, there's not going to be a lot we're going to be able to answer when it comes to that component. So what we'll do is we've got several questions that have been emailed in, and then, of course, we want to take questions from the audience. What we'll do is we'll just look at a couple questions that have been commonly emailed in. We'll get those answered, and then we'll have you folks come up to the mic. Our deputy, Andrea DeYoung, she'll give you a hand with the mic and with the questions. So I think Dr. Kesmani answered the first question. If I flip through this quick. Oh, okay, so there's the question. So are there any health and safety concerns for the public? I think, Doctor, you've answered that, so thank you very much. If there's anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead. It's on.
Can you hear me now? Okay, good. So yeah, I would say, I don't think there's a risk from drinking the water. I would be very comfortable to drink the water here. I would be very comfortable to breathe the air here. I think the Ministry of the Environment, as they said, some of those ditches, there may be some ongoing remediation that's needed there. So I would keep my pets from playing in those ditches. I wouldn't let my children play in those ditches for now. When I say for now, but really at baseline, there's always a risk in those shallow pools of water that don't have flow, and so I'm not sure I would let them play any time in those areas. And so I would say similarly now, that's there. But I wouldn't have any hesitation drinking the water or breathing the air in the area.
Okay, thank you. The second question that we received was quite common, are there environmental concerns as a result of this incident? So if I could call up our environmental science consultant from the city, Mark Green, if you could just speak to that for a moment, and then we'll probably bring in the Ministry of Environment after that.
Okay. Okay, yeah, thank you. My name is Mark Green. I'm the manager of environmental services at the City of St. Catharines. So obviously this was a very significant event for the city, kind of as the chief had indicated. We've brought in a specialized contractor to deal with the hazardous waste they were dealing with, as well as EFI Global, which is an environmental consulting firm to assist. How the property is situated, there's kind of ditches that kind of flow in two different directions. One that goes ultimately up to where Jones Beach is, and the other main branch goes to where kind of Happy Ralph's is. So both of those tributaries are being assessed. One of the challenges is that with the time of year, not everything can be done in February. So to understand the full impact, there still will be additional testing that's going to be needed in the springtime when the weather warms up. So there will be testing, like there has been testing, of course, but there's going to continue to be testing for a significant period of time to fully ensure that we have a good understanding of any impacts and then address those impacts as they do happen. In terms of anyone who's driven down Keefer Road itself has probably seen the ditches there have been kind of scraped up, and that's where a lot of the fire water had gone. That soil has been removed. They're going to be resodded, but of course they can't be resodded until the weather warms up a little bit. So they're still going to be continuing monitoring for quite some time in all those kind of water courses. So. And I will turn over to the ministry if they have any additional kind of comments.
Thanks for that, Mark. And just to echo some of Mark's comments there, I just want to remind everybody that for an incident like this, we are still in the early phases of it. So from the ministry's perspective, we've completed most of the sampling activities that we'll conduct to try to understand what those impacts might be. As I mentioned in my status update, a lot of those results are sitting with our experts to be interpreted. The general trend that we're seeing from a surface water perspective is that there is improvement. So I want to remind everybody that the worst is over, and each day it appears to be getting better. On the air side of things, as we've mentioned, there were no concerns identified. From a soil perspective, we're still completing that work. And as I'd mentioned, we're aiming to have that finished up on the week of March 20th. And again, those results will be circulated to our experts for interpretation. So we'll certainly know more in the coming months. But I would just like to remind people that the worst is over and that the general trend has been improvement.
If I may add, another piece to this that we had done during the investigation while we're doing the environmental work, we haven't spoke to it, is the containment plan of the site. So I think that's another reassuring piece if you want to expand on that for a second.
A great point, Dave. So as I had also mentioned in the status update, we continuously monitor the property and specifically the containment measures on site. So we want to ensure that nothing is leaving that site, entering those ditches, and then we end up in the same sort of situation where those contaminants are present and there's the risk that they may migrate further downstream. So happy to report that those containment measures are in place. We haven't seen any evidence to suggest that materials are leaving the site. And we'll continue those monitoring activities as long as that site is deemed an environmental risk.
So for the simple guy like me, because I'm not an environmental guy, so what does that mean? So what it means is they've built clay walls, they put in booms, retention ponds, we're using a catch basin in the loading dock so that if it rains or snows on that property, it's not leaching off into any of the waterways. So everything that is on 20 Keefer stays on 20 Keefer. Nothing gets out. So that's the layman's piece of the containment plan. Now we want to open up the questions to you folks. Deputy DeYoung will give you a hand if someone wants to come up to the mic. We do have some questions we can roll through here, but we want to give you folks the opportunity to ask your questions. So if anyone wants to come on up.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I had a couple questions. So we were impacted by it, but then, there's lots of stuff afterwards. So my husband and I were taking the dog out for a walk, and in some of the neighborhoods near Parkside, you can still see insulation. Like there's debris from the fire. So I don't know what the plan is. I know when it first happened, everybody was told, don't touch anything. You don't know what's involved. And this isn't on my property, it's on some of the other ones, but you notice it as you're walking. So I don't know if there's a plan for somebody to go back through and clean that stuff up. Is that dangerous? I don't know.
Just for clarification, is it on private property or
Yes.
is it?
Yes, it's on a front lawn.
Okay,
I've
somebody's
seen
front lawn.
I've seen pieces, and of course with the snow, stuff's been hidden, right? It could have fallen, nobody noticed, and then it snows. I just noticed stuff, and we're hyper aware of everything, right?
Sure.
Just something, and it's little, but it's, a homeowner doesn't want to touch it if it's not safe.
Okay, I'm going to pass that over to Mark.
Yeah, okay. Is this on? Yeah, okay, thanks. Yes, if there is something like that on private property, it can be disposed of in the garbage. If there's material that was blown from the fire, or explosion, if that's where it came from, in kind of would be in relatively close proximity to the, where the explosion happened, then at this time with all the length of time, if it's there were definitely pieces, the buildings or things like that had gone. If there's anything, large, then maybe contact the city, but I suspect if that was the case, that would have happened already.
Okay. Okay, great. Anybody else?
Hi, thank you for doing this. It's great to see everybody here. A good response. So I have a couple questions. Do you have a sense of how much of the material stored on site was actually involved in the explosion and ignition?
Yeah, that we don't know. We have no idea as to the volume of whatever material had burned up. So those, unfortunately, with the explosion, the fire, those things we can never really gauge as to how much was on site and how much got burned up. So unfortunately, we can't answer that for you.
Okay. Well, so what is the licensing requirement from the owner's perspective in terms of records, in terms of at any given time? So if you arrive on site, do you have some sense of, they have, because I know they have 6 or 7 20,000 liter tanks and solid waste and all the rest of it. So I'm wondering, in terms of your entering into that, without actually having a sense of, what you might be dealing with or the quantities and how potentially explosive that could be.
Right. I don't know, Andrea, Taylor, do you guys want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, for sure, Dave. So there's kind of 2 parts to that. So we do know that there were materials there that were used to process waste, various chemicals, and we know that they also received hazardous waste as well. So from our perspective, their environmental compliance approval would have requirements put in place to ensure that certain quantities of certain materials, are to be stored a certain way, things of that nature, quantity restrictions. So there are some checks and balances in place there. In terms of what was on site that day, we still don't know.
Okay. So going forward, as somebody who lives just behind the fence, I'm wondering what the status is. Will they be allowed to reopen or continue operations? And if so, what kind of precautions might be put in place to prevent a similar incident in future?
Yeah, and that's a great question. It's one we're hearing a lot of. It's very difficult for me to answer that today. As we know, there's various investigations that are ongoing. So it's something that we would obviously have to work with our agency partners on, along with the business itself, to try to understand what that might look like. But again, it's too early to try to say what the possibility of that might be.
Yeah, what we're going to see is there's, again, like Taylor was saying, there's several agencies involved when a business like that comes together. So there's obviously the licensing piece from the Ministry of Environment, but there's also the building code and fire code requirements. So all of those would have to be, pulled together to make that happen. And right now, with the work being done just to contain the site and make it safe, like that's down the road. So like Taylor said, we're not able to answer that right now.
Right. Okay, so one final question, and from the city's perspective, might you look at, I know the zoning requirements or particular requirements that might be put in place as a result of this incident that might change going forward to prevent something like this happening in future?
CEO Oaks.
Thanks, Dave. Great question. That's our planning and building services department through planning would be looking at that if that's something that council wanted to entertain. The zoning on properties, and this goes across the entire municipality, have permitted uses and different types of businesses that could be part of that. If there were a request to review that would be part of a planning process that would have to go through a very public process. There's a lot of input that happens on that, but planning and zoning really define the types of uses, not necessarily what happens within. So that would be something that council would have to begin if that's something we wanted to look at.
Okay, I guess I'm just thinking, obviously, if something like this, I don't say was necessarily anticipated, but since it has happened, do we now use this as an opportunity to say, okay, how do we prevent this happening in future? And if even to the extent of saying maybe it's not appropriate to have a company like that operating this close to a residential piece. I realize it's zoned commercial, but from the perspective of potential risk going forward, having had this happen, obviously, what if it happens again, right?
So to that point, and the CAO is right, it will come down ultimately to council's decision. I would say that when the investigations are complete and we understand why this happened, how it happened, and we have those details, there are a lot of options that council is going to have to look at. We're at a position now, unfortunately, it's going to take some time, but once those investigations, some of them come to a close, we'll be able to make determinations at that point. I think that's the important thing. We have to know why and how this happened, and if there's a way for us to prevent it in the future through changes we can make to the zoning code or to bylaw, then we're going to take those steps.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yep, thank you. Anyone else?
I just want to bonk you in the head. Really. It's a question about the holding tanks. I'm just wondering, first of all, how many millions of gallons of water did you require, or do you have that information?
So which holding tanks?
When you first did when you first put out the fires?
Right, so the douse water?
Yeah.
You're asking?
I just wondered what amount of water was required.
Oh, how much douse water?
Operation. Yeah.
11.5 million liters of water. Yeah. So I know everyone takes a big, I know, yeah, it's a lot of water. And hence why, as soon as I landed on scene, as soon as I was completed the evacuation piece with the incident commander, my next phone call was to Director Daryl Smith to say, hey, I recognized as soon as I seen all the water towers and I knew how much water they flow, we were in for a lot of water here. And so we had the containment plan. We had to get moving on it very quickly.
And the containers that are still present, obviously they contain all the samples that have been collected and so forth. How do you dismantle that at the end when everything is finished? Like, can you walk us through that process?
Sure, those are called frac trucks, and so I learned a lot. I'm not an environmental guy, but I learned a lot in a hurry. So those frac trucks are currently full of what we're hoping is just stormwater. When we got that snow the following day, and then we had some pretty good rains during the week, actually the Thursday before, it was Thursday, February 9th, we had a ton of rain come down through the night, and all the work that we had done was the dikes and the dams were all being compromised, so there was a huge scramble come Friday. So a lot of water was pulled, and that water is coming from Lakeshore Road, so it wasn't at the site, but we wanted to capture it before it went through the site, right? And so a lot of those frac trucks are full of that storm water from Lakeshore Road. Also the water table, which we discovered, there was a well on Colonial Florist's property we were able to access. They were kind enough to let us measure the water table there. So on the back side of that property, the water table is quite high, and it's quite high over on 25 and 23. So we knew on both sides of the site the water table was up high. So a lot of the water that we had pulled out of the ditches was in an effort to make sure that we didn't have any water flowing through the 20 Keefer and contaminating the rest of the neighborhood. So those frac trucks right now that are on the road in Northrop and in at Happy Ralph's is all storm water that we've captured prior to the site. So that water has gone for testing, and we're optimistic that it's going to come back and just be storm water, and then we'll be able to take it up to the region and they can help us with it.
So you don't empty it before you take it away?
I think what they'll end up doing is they'll pump those frac tanks into a tanker and take it up to the region.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else with some questions?
I was just wondering about the evacuation. I'm not sure what the rules are for an evacuation. Are you obligated to go, or because I noticed half the neighbors went, half didn't go?
Well, so I was in Hurricane Matthew at Myrtle Beach, and I know that we can very politely ask you to go, but we can't make you go. So when we want to evacuate a neighborhood, we'll knock on the door and we'll say, listen, we really compel you to leave for your health and safety, but we can't arrest you and make you leave, if that's what you're asking.
Is there an impact on if something should happen insurance-wise?
Well, you'd have to talk to your insurance company.
Okay. The other question I had was, actually Kathy had that question, but is it going to affect our property values? What happened? Because now everybody knows that we have these industries.
I can't speak to that because I'm not a real estate agent. I think the important thing is like the mayor and the CAO were saying is that regardless of whether a business like this, and I'm not saying this business, any business opens up in our community, whether it's Port Wella or anywhere else, we want to find out, again, how this happened, why it happened, to prevent it, because we don't want it to happen anywhere in our community. As for the property values, we can't speak to how that impacts the neighborhood. That's a question we can't answer.
Okay, well, thank you.
Sorry. Oh, got another question?
I just wanted to follow up with that question. How about our taxes? I'm very pleased to see everyone here, but I can see that this event must have cost a lot. And I know the investigation isn't finished, but if there is a liability assessed, I'm hoping the city's planning to sue the company because otherwise our taxes are going to go up. Is that?
So
do you have any? I'm not sure if I actually asked a question.
I know where you're going. You're asking about cost recovery.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. So how much did this cost, and what's this going to cost the community, right?
And who's going to pay?
And who's paying? I know,
Yes.
because I live down the road too. So,
do you? Okay.
Yes. It's a great question. With the investigations ongoing, obviously we have to wait, and we know that there's still work happening from city and our environmental consultants, so we don't know what the final bill is. The one things that we have is we have insurance companies, and so you have various entities, and for us, we allow them to sort it out. There's insurance coverages and things like that. So I can't speak to it. It's all I know is typically what we do is the insurance companies, they hash that out, and sometimes it ends up in litigation in court, and sometimes it's an amendable agreement. But as for the tax implication, I can't speak to it, and cost recovery, we're hoping that our insurance and the lawyers will sort that all out for us.
And we are too. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to follow up on that. So when the event happened, there's from a cost recovery standpoint, we're looking at all avenues from the municipal perspective to be able to recover through insurance and various other options. We can't necessarily speak to it at this point, but we're looking at all options, and through the investigation and all of those different pieces, we'll be continuing to update, council and the community on how that progresses. But we're looking at all options, definitely.
Lots of good questions. Keep them coming.
It's okay. I think I got it this time. I'm going to ask the question I think everybody wants to ask, and that's our second access. We all had a problem getting out of the neighborhood on the day of the event. I know that's not yours specifically, but we have our council here, we have our mayor here. What's happening? Where are we in the process? That was, a month and a half ago, and I'm really hoping something's been done or discussed because we don't want this to happen again, right?
No, and I appreciate that. And I will say, I think this is actually important to understand. Councillor Dodge and I actually had this discussion in September of last year in the midst of the campaign that there needed to be a secondary access route there, and we discussed options. I think this event has obviously brought that into very clear focus, but I think there was an understanding and we were moving in that direction already. At this point, we have to go through an environmental assessment process to make sure that we can do whatever it is we're going to do, and we're in that process right now. That EA process includes speaking to the public and consultations, but we have already begun looking at all of the possible options that exist, and that environmental assessment process is necessary to do it. But to put your mind at ease, and I know that maybe none of this evening puts your mind that much at ease, but this has been a topic, and I'll give credit to your ward councillors. The deputy mayor and Councillor Dodge have both been very, very forceful before this event, but especially now after, that something needs to be done, and that has been heard by council, and we are moving through the process we have to. I can't really give any more information than that because it's a fairly intricate process when it comes to situations like this, but I promise you that it was a conversation before. It's a very clearly focused conversation now.
Can I add just one more question on that with regards to, because I know this is a process that's been pushed for a long time. So to date, nothing has been done with regards to an environmental lookup for that access. I know we've been down this path for a very long time, and so I just want to know if we've never looked. I know what the two options are, right? Northrop Crescent, which is brand new because that didn't exist before the new neighborhood, and our little walkway at the end of our street where the locks weren't opened for evacuation on the day of, which has always been, I've been in my house for over 20 years, so that's always been the evacuation point. But it just concerns me if there's never actually been, I know it's been nixed at council that they said they wouldn't put a second access in, but so the discovery's never been done with regards to the environment there?
So environmental assessments tend to be very expensive processes. So, but I will say, is it Municipal Works?
No, like the building planning folks and engineering.
Planning, building, and engineering have been engaged in this process now, and it has started. The process itself does cost money, and so when council last year made the decision not to go down that path, the money wasn't spent. The money will be spent in this process to make sure we understand what we can do.
Yes, senior staff is working on it. It's not a dead issue that we put in a parking lot, and we're hoping that everybody forgets about it. The other piece to that too is we're going to put 2 new hydrants in as well because of that supply line that come across Seaway, right? So that particular hydrant on the corner of Keefer and Seaway, that's on the west side, our friends in Municipal Works are going to help us out. They're going to put a hydrant directly across on the east side, which will negate us from having to lay that supply line across. And then the hydrant that sits in front of 23 and 25 Keefer, which is across the street from 20 Keefer, We're going to put a hydrant across the street there as well, so we'll have a hydrant on the south side and the north side. So that's going to help us alleviate some of that stress. And the reason why we didn't unlock the gates is because we knew we had North Road. So there wasn't a sense of urgency to open up there. So, no, it's great. I know everyone's worried about it.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So, great, we're going to get new fire hydrants, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
It's a very stressful day, sorry. I knew I was going to do that. What would you have done if both the bridges would have been up?
Pardon me?
What would you have done? Where would we have been if both bridges were up? Because that happens a lot.
Yeah, it happens. We come across the Homer. Yeah, yeah.
So you
Wow.
talked about, how quick you got there. I mean, fantastic. Like, thank you, honestly.
Yeah.
It's
So
amazing.
you're saying if this happened in the summer and all 3 bridges are up?
Usually there's
Yeah.
2.
No, I know.
I've never, well,
So,
okay, 3.
yeah,
But we've all had the
Right.
concern. We talk about it all the time. If my house was on fire, who's coming to put it out?
yeah.
Or, God forbid, somebody's sick, car accidents, that sort. I think you get the point, so.
Yeah, so we're talking back and forth. So this question, of course, has been asked, and again, your counselors have been doing an amazing job. We have a meeting at the end of the month with the CAA Oaks.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. One of the points, and I know the Chief had mentioned that we would use Homer. There's also some protocols, I believe, that are in place for them to be able to lower one of the bridges if an event were to happen in that situation. However, in terms of long-term, there's a meeting that's being coordinated, and I'll pass it over to the mayor in a little bit. We've, over the last several years, been meeting with the Seaway in particular on trying to address some of these issues through both Councillor Dodge and Councillor Phillips and along with Mayor Cisco, trying to highlight and figure out a path forward on that. There is a meeting being scheduled in the upcoming I think, few weeks with both the Seaway, the federal representatives from Transport Canada, as well as our elected representatives. Well, I'll pass it over to the mayor.
Thanks, Dave. And I will say, this has been something, I've been acutely aware of this since I got elected to council 13 years ago. It's been a frustration for that entire time. Obviously significantly less significant, but if you remember the debates about GO Transit and whether we could get a GO train, it came down to simply the Seaway couldn't guarantee that they wouldn't have traffic going and that the bridges could be down for the trains. This obviously is of significantly greater importance, but to this point it we've not been able to make headway. So I will just encourage everybody here, your city councilors, Chief said it, your city councilors have been advocating for this every single year since I met them 13 years ago. They continue to advocate. Again, they're even more forceful now because the thing we had feared would happen happened with an emergency event, and very luckily the time of year the bridges were down. I'm going to encourage everybody, because this is a federal waterway with federal jurisdiction, please reach out to your MPs. Send them a letter. In this case, it's MP Biddle, but I would say copy every MP in Niagara region, because they've all been caught at a bridge. Every single one of them, all 4 of them, know exactly what that situation is, and remind them that this is what we've been talking about. Because at the end of the day, Transport Canada regulates that seaway, and the St. Lawrence Seaway Corporation answers to Transport Canada. So please message your MP, all of the MPs in Niagara, and let them know why this is important. We're going to have this meeting, and I will look to the Deputy Mayor, but I believe this is not the first meeting that's been had expressing this, but we're going to do it again, and we're going to keep going back to them. And I'm hopeful we can get some headway. But if your federal MPs are engaged on this, that might move the needle a little bit more than just City Council.
Okay, great. Okay, anything else?
This question is for the Ministry of Environment. I understand this facility was a licensed waste management facility. Can you tell us when the last inspection was done and if they were in compliance?
Yeah, I can share some details on that. The last inspection done was in 2020. There were plans to have them inspected this year. In fact, we were to be there a week after the fire occurred. So In 2020, the facility was in compliance. And I want people to keep in mind that, you know, we can't be in every facility at once. There's a lot of different facilities in Niagara that we'd like to be in every year. But, you know, we try to take a risk-based approach to how we do our inspection planning. We're also very complaint-driven. And from a complaint perspective, we really didn't get many for Sonics. So there were plans to be there. Unfortunately, this incident happened before we could be there. And not to say that that inspection would have changed what occurred that day, but, you know, certainly it could have shed some light on some issues that could have possibly prevented it.
But wouldn't this be grounds now to not renew their license since this has happened?
Well, certainly we need to learn more about what caused that incident. So, you know, like I said earlier, we're still in the early stages of the investigation. There's lots of information that we need to look at before something like that could occur. So it's really difficult for me to say tonight, you know, whether or not that license would be revoked.
Okay, thank you.
Mind, I won't take my mask off. Is that fine?
No, that's fine.
Okay, speaking to the environmental process for Northrop Road, I have one concern. The city doesn't own the land. Grey Forest, as far as I know, still owes the property. So will that be put on hold for any future building permits while the environmental process proceeds?
So you're asking about the owner of the Northrop
Can
access?
they build before you complete the environmental process on whether that road can even be used?
CAO?
Thank you. We're, as part of the environmental assessment, looking at all the options. If there were to be a building on that property, that would be a difficult solution. So what I can say is that option is still available through the process. That's all I can really say at this point.
Okay, so the city could expropriate the land if they needed to.
Correct. The city could expropriate, the city could purchase, you know, there's all of those options are still, and that's part of the environmental assessment process, looking at all options.
Okay, that's fair. The other question I have is to the evacuation plan. We're one of the families that got missed in the evacuation, and I have found out there's 2 or 3 others that weren't even notified. So I know they were supposedly knocking door to door. We were very clearly up at that point, and no one ever knocked on our door. I then made a call, because we're not social media savvy, to CHCH News, which we watch in the morning, to see if they could investigate and put something on the TV. And they would do what they could. Shortly thereafter, I called the city and got Citizens First. They said they checked with the appropriate people and got back to me online and said we were to shelter in place. Then the mayor was on television on CHCH that morning, and he said everybody who had been evacuated was already evacuated, and everybody should shelter in place. We were missed, others were missed. My son drove from Chippewa and went out to the police department at Lock One Bridge and said, my parents are still inside their house and refusing to leave because they have not been notified. Because we felt it wasn't safe to go outside, we had taken all the precautions we could inside to get air not coming in our home. However, we got missed. So what is the solution moving forward where people that are either, as we have many in our communities that are seniors and unable to get to the door quickly, so they wouldn't have answered if they could have, those of us that supposedly got missed, how is that going to be prevented in the future? And where were the police with their loudspeakers, at least for some people to hear if they didn't hear the knock on the door?
So part of the process when we have any fire, whether it's a room and contents fire or a structure fire or something of this magnitude, is an after-action review. So as part of the process of what we're going through now with the investigations and the recovery, in another month or two, when we start to get things sorted out, we will be sitting down with all of the agencies to go through that, because yours is not the first story that we've heard of somebody who's got missed. So we'll be able to do an internal one with our Emergency Operations Center folks, with our senior leadership team. We'll be sitting down and just identifying gaps that we experienced, areas where we can find improvement, but then also we'll be going out with our third party agencies, the EMS, the police. We'll be working, I know I was already talking with Taylor about some of the things that I thought we could do differently at the fire, so we'll be having conversations with the Ministry of Environment and finding areas where we can improve. So hopefully we will close that gap.
Okay, that would be appreciated. And then you talked about the douse water coming from the fire. Because we weren't evacuated, we saw more than most people did that were evacuated. Down through Eastport Park, because our property butts onto that ditch, we saw huge amounts of a reddish-brown water surging like a raging river through that ditch, past our house, and who knows, towards the lake. How soon was that water stopped before it actually got into the lake? And I know I've talked to various people about what's being done as soil studies in that ditch, and all our properties that butt up against it, as we're even afraid to perhaps plant vegetables in our garden because the water would have come in underneath.
Right. Well, yeah, there's no question water got into the lake. And so we had asked First Response to bring their marine unit as well. So we put booms out in the lake because we knew water was going to get by us, right? So that we took steps to try to mitigate as well. When it came to soil sample testing, and I can defer to Andrea and Taylor, I know that we had First Response, EFI Global, and the Ministry of Environment were all doing soil testing, and we were collaborating in the trailer. Like, they were testing at the beach, they were testing Jones Beach, they were testing everywhere, and we were working together to make sure that the three of us weren't testing the same ditch. So we had the map out to spread out. So I don't know, Andrea, if you want to talk a little bit about, or Taylor, a bit about the soil sampling, but I know it wasn't as though we just focused on 20 Keefer. We were testing at Happy Ralph's, down Northrop, and then as we moved north all the way to the lake.
We have witnessed some of that, but what has been done about the properties that actually butt onto the ditch where we know the contaminated water went by?
Well, that's where the sampling comes in.
Yeah, and that's a great question. So what we're hoping to get from our analysis is kind of a general idea of what we could expect to see in those areas that, douse water would have impacted, right? It's just sort of that preliminary step to better understand what we're looking at. Once we have the results, like I said earlier, they'll be interpreted by our experts, and then we can start to look at what a cleanup plan might be, right? So if we've determined that there are those impacts that need to be remediated, like I had said in my update there, that we'll be ensuring that those actions take place.
And if that water seeped under our fences and into our gardens, what about that on private property?
Well, again, we're going to look at the full extent of the full extent of the contamination, provided there is some, right? So these are things that we'll look at. If there are areas that need to be remediated, private property or otherwise, that would be included in any remedial action plan.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Ready? Oh, I thought it was you. Okay. Yeah, hi everyone. Just a quick question. Given the magnitude of this event, why were communications so slow coming to residents? You mentioned, Chief Upper, that the first week you realized that you had to go 10 feet at a time. That kind of information would have helped mitigate the fears that residents had. We listened to the Board of Health and yourself tonight saying you're going to be ongoing, conducting investigations. What is the communication plan going forward so that we can get a regular flow of information?
So what we want to do is we want to really utilize the city's website. I know they've set up like a Keefer Road web page where we'll be able to continuously update that, and you'll be able to find all the information on that web page in our city website.
Second question, I know it's sort of a Westport Weller question, but if there was an explosion of some sort in between Wildwood and Cindy, what's the evacuation route for Westport Weller?
Well, I'd like to think we don't have any industrial going on in that area. I know I was looking at the map, so there's nothing I see. I don't anticipate having to evacuate a large piece of that neighborhood. So yeah, I know that you can come through Cindy, you can come up Arthur. I think Noel has a way through there as well. So those would be the accesses we'd be looking to get out. But I don't see a need to evacuate like the full neighborhood.
And gas explosion, something, I mean, this incident was unforeseen, even though, you know, all the elements were in place for it to happen. Just curious.
Yeah, no, that, and I mean, obviously the roads are the roads, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So, yeah, thank you.
Hi, when the site is being debrided, where do the contaminants go? The water and the soil and the debris, where are they being sent?
So you're talking like from this day forward with the owner?
From
or?
day one after the explosion, when the cleanup started, where are all the chemicals, all the toxic waste being disposed?
So the stuff that was hydrovaced through first response, they have their companies that they take for water treatment. So I don't know where those are, but obviously it has to be certified where they're sending the water.
And the solid waste, where's that going?
Again, same thing, like we leave that up to our contractors to look after that. They have different businesses that take care of that for them.
Is it possible to find out precisely where that is? Mine is a loaded question because I have it on good authority that when there's been rudimentary cleanups in Niagara Falls, they're being sent to unlicensed waste facilities.
Through the RFP process of the city, I'd be shocked if that happens because with the legal implications with finance, it's a very rigorous process to ensure, obviously, like they're licensed, WSIB, insurance, all those pieces. So for them to just go dump it in an unlicensed site,
It's happened. My friends have followed the trucks.
I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I mean, we can obviously ask, but
okay, yeah. Please, when you find out, make that publishable information. I'd be curious to know where it's going.
Yeah, I can't promise that. I don't know what's privileged and what's not.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just would like to add too that if you do have information about material going to unlicensed site, we'd be happy to talk with you afterwards, or we can connect possibly through email because we'd be interested in following up.
I would love that. Thank you.
Perfect. No problem.
Okay. Yeah. Anyone else?
Quick question about to the Ministry of the Environment, I guess. To the businesses that remain, there's some really great businesses in the area that do good work, and they're ISO 9000 and really well run. But what's kind of the schedule of investigation and checkup? Basically, how frequently are these businesses being checked up upon? And is the schedule being published, or can that information be published?
Typically, no, we don't schedule, we don't publish that information because then we would give them the heads up that we're coming to inspect.
After the fact is what I'm
okay.
talking about. Yeah, like a safety record of the businesses that are still operating.
And that's a great question. I don't know if that's something that we're doing. There is the Freedom of Information process. So if you did have a particular company in mind, you could go through that process to dig up that sort of information. Just in terms of facilities in the general area, like I had mentioned earlier, we do try to take a risk-based approach. So sites like hazardous waste facilities, we tend to put higher in that risk priority. And, really, I'm just trying to think of that area in particular. I know that there were some folks concerned about, I guess, a large chemical producer in the area. That was one of the emails that we received right across the road. So we did inspect that site in the following days because some concerns were raised around that and some of the materials that may be on site there. And again, like I mentioned earlier, we are complaint driven. So if there are concerns about a particular site, that's something that we would respond to.
Right. Okay. Another question then, relating to, like, start digging in and find certain things on the web and whatnot, and ended up seeing Sonic's 2010, their certificate information. And again, it was from 2010, so it was kind of out of date. And I thought there was an update of it, and I can't be sure because I don't want to really. But it looked like they had to provide a $43,000 a bond, whatever, too, for an event of a spill. And can you speak to that? Like, is that a true number? And if it is, isn't it ridiculously small? And wouldn't it?
No, I don't think that number's accurate.
No? Okay.
Off the top of my head, I don't know the exact amount required for their financial assurance. So just so everyone's aware, in their environmental compliance approval, there is a condition that would require them to put up financial assurance. So it's a certain sum of money in the event that they were unwilling or unable to clean up their property. So that's something that's there. Again, I don't have the specific number off the top of my head today, but I know it's much higher than the number that you're mentioning.
Yeah, good. The company, this is Ministry of the Environment. What's the date? December 1st, 2010, yeah. So the company shall maintain financial assurance as defined in Section 131 of the Act of $41,523.90. This financial assurance shall be provided. Now, again, this was back in 2010, but it does seem like it's, even in 2010 dollars, like $43,000 would have got swallowed up in about, what, 5 minutes?
Right, and again, that's a great point, and I don't know enough about the operations in 2010 and what they look like. We do require sites to do regular financial assurance reevaluations. So in 2010, the site may have been operating on a much smaller scale, dealing with smaller quantities of waste than they are today, but that's constantly being evaluated. So as that number grows in terms of quantity, that financial assurance requirement would grow with it.
Right, good. Okay, thank you.
If I could just ask one question to clarify. When I went on a website, that was the most current information I could find. So there's nothing on there subsequent to that. In fact, it was reduced from 61,000 to 41,000. I don't know if there was an appeal process, but that's the most current information. So are you saying that it has been updated, but the site has not been updated, or why wouldn't
so
that?
Is that the Sonic's website?
Correct. No, it's the Ministry of the Environment.
Okay, so I can say that number there has been updated. I don't know which part of the ministry website that you found that information.
This is amendment to provisional certificate of approval waste disposal site.
No, I understand that, but I just don't know where you found that on the ministry website. So there could be more updated information available. I just know through our records that there is a different amount, one that's more reflective of the material that's on site in 2022.
Okay, so where would we find that then?
That's a great question. So we do have a website. It's called Access Environment, and it actually has a map portion. So you could either type in the address or zoom into that particular location, and it should have the environmental compliance approval information there. Keep in mind that there are sites that have a number of amendments and notices. So as the facility changes, they're required to do what's called an amendment. So they would apply for that amendment. I want to say that most of those amendments would be up to date on that website, but there may be some that aren't.
Okay.
So a financial assurance update would come in the form of a notice. And like I said, that these are something that are happening fairly regularly. I believe it's every 2 years where reevaluation would be required. So regardless of if they change their facility operations or not, that requirement would still remain in effect.
Okay, all right. I'll have another look.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Just to follow up there, if you want to talk offline afterwards, I can give you my information and we can make sure you get that.
Thank you.
Just a quick question that sort of piggybacks on that, and just from the inspection standpoint. So you do updates with regards to financial, so you have an idea of what's changing in the environments, but you don't do inspections to back up what they're doing in paperwork?
No, we do. They have a requirement through their environmental compliance approval. There's a condition there that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a self-reporting thing, right? And it may not. The facility itself may not change in terms of the operation. Quantities received may not change, but things like inflation need to be considered. There's a variety of factors that go into a financial assurance calculation.
Okay. But there's no MOE process that every year.
So
But you don't do an inspection, like, so you're not checking, because you said you hadn't been there in a couple of years. So
Right.
I'm just looking for like a timeline for these companies, right? Because a lot changes obviously in 2.5 years.
Yeah.
So they can be submitting paperwork saying one thing and then operating completely differently.
No, and that's fair. So if we did run into a situation where maybe there's a red flag, that may trigger an inspection. That did not happen in this case.
All right, nope, it's okay, it's good.
Can you just tell us the type of contaminants that you are finding in the river? Is that possible?
In the ditches?
Yeah.
I mean, it's what we're seeing that's been elevated are VOCs and metals. So, and not to say that there aren't some other contaminants present there, but those are the ones that have been elevated.
What are VOCs?
Volatile organic compounds. And do keep in mind, like I mentioned earlier, we're seeing a general trend of improvement. So our worst sample results were from the day after the fire, and then our monitoring activities in the coming weeks and months have shown that there's been an improvement on that front.
I think this triggered something that you had said earlier, Chief, that there were some chemicals that you could not identify at the fire the day of because the labels, because of the explosion. Have they all been identified now?
No, so what's happened is they've taken those samples with them as part of their data collection, and so it's gone to the Center for Forensic Sciences to run through their lab for identification. So it becomes all part of the investigation. So no, I won't know them, and I won't know them for months until we get the investigative report back. Be aware though, in speaking with the mobile lab, if some of the chemicals we may not know because they could be mixed, right? So say paints, right? So let's say they're if you think of colored paints, right? If you show up with a gallon of paint, I show up with a gallon of paint, we're all throwing them in a big 1,000-liter vat.
Mm-hmm.
They won't know if there's white paint, green paint, blue paint, yellow paint, right? So they might put all the acids in one vat, but they might not be able to identify exactly what acid it was, but they'll know it's an acid. So we might not know all of the chemicals that go in there, and we potentially could, but I was forewarned by the lab that there is the potential we might not ever know what was. We'll know the base of it, whether it's an acid or an alkaline, but we won't know exactly what chemical.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And we did talk about the contaminants in the water, and I appreciate all the information we've heard this evening. One of the things, though, that I was thinking about was the impact on our vegetation, like the trees and the shrubs, and I think people mentioned some of those things, but I didn't know if that had come up in any of the answers that we had talked about tonight.
Yeah, I can quickly comment on that. That's what I was saying earlier, where some of the monitoring we can't do until the spring. Like, we can't tell, if there's damage to aquatic vegetation in February. So that's just going to take some time. Yeah, I think that's all I can really comment on that.
Okay. All right.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? We'll give you the 5-minute warning. Here, we're going to try to wrap it up at 8:30, so.
Sorry, just one more. With March break upon us and a lot of children around, what is the plan for Happy Rolfs? We've noticed a few times when we've left our home, there are cars parked right beside all those big containers in the parking lot, and there's going to be more and more kids. Is that really going to be a safe environment for the kids in the coming weeks?
Yeah, all those frac trucks, they're contained. So like we said, that stormwater we captured prior to hitting 20 Keefer. So we're confident that it's clean stormwater. And so hopefully, actually, as a matter of fact, I received an email today about getting those frac trucks moving. So we're trying to work with First Response and their company to get those things rolling. Whether we get them out in March break or not, I don't know. But yeah, the park, it's safe for the kids to be there. There's no concern.
Okay, thank you.
So, okay, we're good? All right, perfect. I'm gonna, oh, hang on, one more question maybe?
It's not a question. I just want to end it kind of on a positive note that I was one of the idiots, local residents that was out there 6:35. By 6:37, I had my coat on and I was down on Blossom, you know, with my head up in the air looking up at this fire, just totally in shock. And stood there for about 4 or 5 minutes as others gathered. And then by 6:47, there was a perceptible change. We heard water flowing, and the smoke went kind of from it. The smoke changed, and it went. Okay, wait a minute. You hear that? That's water flowing, and that was really good. And we really appreciate, you know, how fast you got there and everything that was done by all the agencies. We didn't make it to the evacuation center. Funny thing, my wife had COVID, so we decided we'd stay away. And but quick funny, we ended up at a movie theater in the back of a movie theater, and sure enough, the movie theater, the fire alarm went off. Twice in one day we got evacuated. So, but anyway, at that it was good news because at the end of it all, that was when we were given the clearance to get back, and so we were back in our house by 4:30. So thank you everybody in the city that did a great job, and it's a disaster, but yeah, we all came together.
Thank you very much. If I can just, I'll call on CAO Oakes to close us out. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, and I want to take the opportunity to thank all of you for coming tonight and for being patient with us as we're trying to go through all of the various investigative processes. But I want to, in particular, thank all of the staff, all of the agencies, our fire service who are on scene like that, all of our staff who are at the Kiwanis Aquatic Center to manage the whole entire process, all of our teams in municipal works across the entire corporation, from planning to our emergency management. This has been a full court press at City Hall for the last 2 months. It was literally 2 months. It's 2 months of time that has taken. You know, it's something that we have all been talking about at City Hall every day. I know the residents, all of you are impacted every day. You see it, you lived through it. My condolences to the family. This has been, I know, a very tough situation for all. We are doing everything we can to keep the communication flowing. We're going to continue to ask. If you have questions, continue to send them through our emergency management at stcatharines.ca. If you haven't seen a question answered tonight or we haven't had a chance to go through it, we're going to continue to update our website. It's stcatharines.ca/Keefer Road Fire. And we're going to continue to update as we get more information from the ministry. That will continue to be populated, and we're hearing the community, we're hearing our councillors loud and clear that we want to do everything we can to make sure the entire community is safe, and you're all able to enjoy your neighborhoods and moving forward. So, with that, I just want to thank you all. Wish you safe travels, and we'll continue the updates as we move forward. So, thank you very much.